What I'm here to talk to you about is misinformation and trust on the web. I'm giving this talk because I'm afraid that far too much energy is being pointed in the wrong direction. And I'm hoping that by talking to you, I can redirect some of that energy into what I think is the necessary direction. And that direction is trust. The summary of this talk is that trust in others is fundamental to how we decide what to believe, but that it isn't being surfaced on the web. The tools that we use don't capture trust in their models or in their interfaces. And if we don't fix that, we're going to be drowned by misinformation. And so we need to change the tools that we use to empower individuals and organizations to make their own choices about which sources they trust, to allow all of those sources to provide accuracy assessments of the information that's found online, and to empower everybody to ignore any content that is labeled as inaccurate by the sources that they trust. We all have seen plenty of misinformation. We've seen misinformation about health, misinformation about elections, misinformation about major world conflicts. Besides these broad categories or these sort of broadly targeted pieces of misinformation, there's also misinformation that gets targeted at specific individuals and destroys their lives, or convinces people to bring guns into pizza parlors, or kills products because misinformation spreads about the product or the creator of that product. And the reaction that I see everywhere is that the platforms ought to fix this, right? They're the source of the problem. They should fix the problem. That's an interesting change. The platforms should fix this. They're the source of the problem. But there are two problems with this claim. One is that they can't fix it. The scale of the problem is too large. Platforms do not have the resources necessary to actually tackle all of the misinformation, find it, flag it, and deal with it. Another part of the problem is that a lot of that misinformation is not fundamentally on the platforms. It's in all sorts of random places on the web, and people can arrive at it through many different pathways. The second objection to this approach is that the platforms should not be held responsible for fixing this problem, because there is no consensus on what is misinformation that the platforms can actually follow, right? Do we want Democrats to decide what is misinformation and what should be blocked? Do we want Republicans to make that decision? Probably neither. Do we want the platforms to make it for themselves, guided as they are by a profit motive? Also seems like a terrible idea. So we have this general problem that platforms are not trusted, or that nobody is trusted by everybody to be the arbiter of truth, especially the platforms. But trust is central to this, right? In fact, trust is our primary source of knowledge. We think we learn things, but what we believe to be true is not because we've checked it for ourselves, but because somebody has told us that it's true and we trust them. I don't know how many of you have actually gone out and spent a few decades measuring temperatures around the world in order to verify that global warming is happening, right? Now, this being MIT, it's probably more than zero, right? But it's probably a small number. Right? The rest of us believe it because of the trust networks. We receive that information from sources who have received it from other sources who trust it, and so on, down to the original sources of the information. So the problem is that the web does not materialize this. It does not give us tools to work with this. We have to do it all in our own heads, which are very limited, and we need to fix that. So we've been exploring a trust-centric approach to dealing with misinformation, where we let anyone declare what is accurate and what is inaccurate on the web, and attach these assessments to any content that they find. We then give everybody the autonomy to decide who they trust, and we let people filter to see only information that has been verified by people and sources that they trust, and help them ignore information that isn't verified. We've implemented some of these ideas in a platform and a browser extension called Trustnet, which you can all download and play with. Using this tool, anyone can mark any web page or post on a social media site as accurate or inaccurate, and people who trust them will see those marks anywhere they are on the web. This is on any page, any post, and also on pages that link to those pages and posts, because we don't want people clicking into misinformation in the first place. So here's just a quick look at it. The first thing you do is choose your sources that you trust. These can be individuals or news organizations or fact-checking websites, so on and so forth, as long as they participate in the platform. And then as you browse around the web, you can pop open a little tab on any web page and assess that web page as accurate or inaccurate. Okay? You can also put a flag saying you would like somebody you trust to assess it for you because you don't know. After you've done that, as you browse around the web, or as people who trust you browse around the web, they will see these marks, right? Here I'm looking at a particular news aggregator. Here's one article that somebody has assessed to be true that I trust, and a couple of articles that that person who I trust has assessed to be false. You'll notice that besides the red X, these articles that have been assessed inaccurate are also faded out because, again, we want to help people not have their lives cluttered by misinformation. You can still click on that faded link. It will take you to the article, but if the article has been assessed as inaccurate, you'll get this pop open saying, this is an inaccurate article, you should be careful with it. You can still add your own assessment if you disagree. This assessment of links applies also on news feeds. So here's somebody scrolling through their Twitter feed, and again, some of this content has been flagged as inaccurate and faded out. That's because somebody marked the post marked the article that the post is pointing to as inaccurate, and that propagates into Twitter. The same for Google News if you use a newsreader. And similarly on YouTube, right? Videos in a playlist are marked, or if you actually go to visit a video and it's been flagged as inaccurate, you'll get this pop open to warn you. We tried to carry this idea farther. We built a tool called Reheadline, which lets you not only flag misinformation, but fix it. And we focused on article headlines because there's a lot of research that says that people often don't bother reading the articles. They get their information from the headline. And unfortunately, they also share it without reading it, right? Just because of what they saw in the headline. So we want to fix this. And so using Reheadline, which is also part of the Trustnet platform, anyone can propose a fixed headline for one that is inaccurate. You only see the replacements suggested by people that you trust anywhere those headlines appear on the web. So here we have, hello. Here we have somebody deciding that they need to replace a headline in a New York Times article. This isn't for misinformation, this is actually for lack of information, so somebody's adding some clarity to the headline because they don't want it to be clickbait. And now you see, as you look through the New York Times, that article has a new headline in place. So, as we've done this work, we've collected a bunch of objections and concerns and challenges that people have raised, and I want to talk about the main ones. The first is about scale. How could any one person find enough people to trust to assess the entire web? Well, they can't. But remember that my trusted sources have their own trusted sources who have their own trusted sources, right? And this is the way social construction of knowledge works, right? Is that it all comes down to these trust networks, and knowledge propagates through them. And that can also happen on the web, right? So maybe my trusted sources don't know, but if they trust somebody who does know, that information can be delivered to me. Another question that we get is, do people really want this? This seems like work, right? One reviewer complained about using people to do unpaid labor for the platforms, because really the platforms should be doing this assessment. Well, in fact, according to our surveys, a lot of people want to do this and already are doing it for their friends and for their relatives. Right? According to conversations I've had with colleagues at MIT, they would really like to be able to flag when some newspaper is saying something completely wrong about their area of expertise. I'll point out that fact-checking organizations exist in order to do this, and journalists do it as part of their jobs, right? But unfortunately, all of this fact-checking work is lost or buried, right? When you get to this news article, you don't know that some fact-checking organization has looked deeply into it and decided that it's false. Right? You have to actually go searching, and who has the time for that? So what we need to do is surface all of this fact-checking work onto the content that is being fact-checked, and then I think we will have success. The last concern that people, or another concern that people raise, is about filter bubbles. Right? This is just going to empower the conspiracy theorists to block off any corrections of the things that they believe. Right? Well, I have two responses to this. One is an ethical one, which is that we consider autonomy pretty important, right? Imposing our will on other people is generally considered a bad thing. right? And that includes imposing autonomy, allowing people to make choices about what information they want to receive, what they want to hear. There's case law about the First Amendment right against compelled listening to complement the right to free speech, right? A second argument is a practical one, that is, we can keep shoving information at the conspiracy theorists, but if they don't trust us, it won't matter, because they won't believe what we're telling them, right? What we need to do instead is find ways to connect people who believe the wrong things, which again is a very subjective concern, but to connect the people who believe the wrong things to people who believe the right things and who are trusted by those people. That's the way to convince them to change their minds. And if we materialize this trust network, that's what we'll be able to do. We'll be able to say, oh, you believe this, but you know, there's somebody in your trust network who believes the opposite. Maybe you should take a look at what they're saying. Let me finish up by just mentioning AI, since everybody has to talk about AI, right? So I think that AI is going to be a horrific contribution to misinformation, right? Everybody talks about how it's going to solve the problem, but I actually believe that it's going to make it 10 times worse, right? Because so far, we've relied on some decent heuristics for dealing with misinformation, right? If we see a nicely crafted website which looks professional and well paid for, that gives us some trust in the credibility of that website, right? We look at videos and we say, seeing is believing, that must be true, right? We trust majority opinions everywhere on the web, right? So many sites based on social voting, upvoting, ranking, so on and so forth. With AI, all of this is doomed, right? Because now we have essentially an infinite number of entities that can do everything that people do. Right? And so we're going to have beautifully crafted websites. We already do have beautifully crafted websites constructed by AI. So the quality of the website is no longer an indicator. Okay? We won't be able to trust majority voting anymore. Right? And really the only reliable signal is going to be this direct trust link. Okay? Now, we're not going to be able to do this only with technology. There are going to have to be cultural changes as well. We have to convince people to actually think about this distinction between information and misinformation and not just share everything, right? We have to get them thinking about deciding who to trust and recognizing that trustworthy people can sometimes be wrong, and that doesn't mean you give up on trust. So in summary, we're currently demanding that platforms clean up misinformation. They can't and they shouldn't. Instead, we need to empower individuals and organizations to make their own choices about the sources they trust, attach accuracy assessments to the content that they find, and ignore content that their trusted sources label as inaccurate. There are lots more questions, and we have some interesting answers. So contact us. Help us work on this problem. This work is the thesis work of Farnaz Jahanbakhsh, who just finished her PhD with me, in collaboration with Amy Zhang, who finished her PhD with me a little sooner. Thanks very much.